Out of all the one-bar builds you could play in ESO, the heavy attack Magicka Warden may just be the easiest and have the most power of them all. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're worried about changes to heavy attack builds or Oaken Soul builds coming with the Necrom chapter, then this build is going to help you out a lot. Yes, there has been small changes to the Empower buff, reducing its damage. The Stormmaster set may be changing as well, but if you play a Warden, you can easily counter any of these updates with a free megaton of passive critical damage. Magicka Warden also has lots of penetration, easy access to the off-balance debuff, and massive burst healing. And this is all just basic crafted and dungeon sets, making this build easy to set up and even easier to play. I'm excited to show you guys this update for the heavy attack Warden, so let's jump right into it. All right, everybody, here we are back on the Magicka Warden with an updated one-bar setup. Moving into update 38 in the Necrom chapter, I did want to showcase that one bars are still really good, you guys. Heavy attack builds are not going away anytime soon. And actually, one of the strongest classes for heavy attack builds is the Warden. So let's go ahead and dive into the setup here and get started with the build. First, taking a look at the character sheet. Looking at the stats here, overall, very nice. We've got 30k max Magicka, 29k max health, which is huge, almost 19k stamina. So very good resources overall. And check out those recoveries. This is buffed with a tri-stat potion, just for example, but even with basic potions, this looks really good. 1300 Magicka recovery, almost 4000 health recovery. That is optional. That's just a way to easily heal in more difficult content. We'll talk about that in a minute, how I maintain those numbers. But also very solid damage, critical chance, and penetration, and armor values overall. Of course, we do have 64 points into max Magicka. That's what you're going to want as a Magicka Warden. And all kinds of different buffs we'll talk about. As far as food goes, though, I do recommend Bewitched Sugar Skulls, especially if you intend to play completely solo, as this gives you just a ton of resources, max health, max stamina, max Magicka, but also the health recovery, which helps a lot with survival. And if you're not worried about that so much, if you want to focus more on group content, then a blue food that gives you max health and max Magicka, that's going to be the recommended way to go there. Tons of other buffs we can see here. But in terms of the Mundus Stone, we're going to be using Thief Mundus. Very important to increase that critical chance. We have tons of critical damage, in fact. Being a Khajiit, being a Warden, using a few pieces of medium armor. Let's actually look at that. So, unbuffed here in our advanced stats. Critical damage 54%. That's on top of your base 50%. So at about 104% critical damage. And that's not even proccing, Minor Brittle, which we have access to on the Warden with a lot of our skills. You can tweak these numbers, obviously, with different armor weights and such, but just something to keep in mind, and why the Warden is so strong with solo builds, particularly with the Oaken Soul, because of your critical damage. Now, I did mention our race being Khajiit. I think it's really good, you guys, to consider using Khajiit on this build. A couple of reasons. Number one is the recovery. So this is going to play into the health recovery stat, which is very good for survival. The other recoveries, honestly, you don't need, since this is going to be a heavy attack build. The extra health recovery and the maximum stats here, max health, Magicka, stamina, really nice. And of course, critical damage and critical healing increased by 12%. That's the Feline Ambush passive. This is incredibly powerful for both solo and group play. So Khajiit, like I said, very good choice for this particular build. Of course, you can make this work on anything, really. Any of the damage races would be almost as good. So we're talking about like High Elf, Dark Elf, Orc. Those would kind of be my second place options if you're looking for something else there. But then finally, in terms of the potion, like I said, I'm using tri-stat potions just to show you the optimal amount of recovery. But if you don't have that, either a health or a Magicka potion is fine. You can even use armor potions to get even more defenses on this build. It gets kind of crazy. If you want more information on that, I'll have that in the written guide. The link is going to be in the description and the pinned comment. Yeah, let's jump right into gear sets next. And I wanted to show you that this build is still extremely simple. You can run heavy attack builds on any class. There have been a few changes on the PTS in terms of heavy attack sets, which ones are viable, which ones are not. Luckily, the main 5-piece set for heavy attack builds, that being Sergeant's Mail, is still very good. You can see this does give us health and health recovery playing into the survival setup on this build, but we also get weapon and spell damage, and we also get the Sergeant's Focus buff. So that's 645 bonus damage per stack that affects both the ticks of your lightning staff and that final big damage hit, and that's going to stack up to 4 times. This works perfectly on 1-bar builds. You don't bar swap, you don't have to worry about losing your stacks, so it's super easy to maintain this in any content. Now this is a base game set too, so it's fairly easy to get. This comes from the Wayrest Sewers dungeon. I definitely recommend you invest some time farming this set if you're interested in 1-bar builds, and especially heavy attack builds. It is really, really good. There's really a specific way that we want to run this to optimize the build. That's using the lightning staff. Remember, this is a 2-handed weapon that's going to give us 2 pieces for our bonus. Then the third piece is going to come from the chest. Heavy chest in this case, it's going to give us the most armor of any body piece. So that's kind of the maximum body piece to use there. And then 2 pieces of jewelry, Sergeant's necklace, Sergeant's ring. I did transmute these. I do recommend doing that because the healthy trait that these come with by default is not very good for solo content. It doesn't give you any extra damage at all. Bloodthirsty is actually ideal in this case. And then the either weapon or spell damage enchants, it doesn't really matter. You can use spell damage for a little bit of extra Magicka recovery if you want. So that's the first 5-piece set. For the second 5-piece set, I'm really leaving that open for some different options. If you've been following the PTS patches, you might have seen one of the better heavy attack sets in the game called Stormmaster. That's potentially going to see some changes, maybe a bit less uptime, making it not quite as good. I don't know if those changes will go through to live, but I did want to just showcase that you don't need to run a second, heavy attack focused set. Something that focuses either on critical chance or critical damage is going to be pretty much as good as getting a heavy attack bonus. So in this case, a set like Order's Wrath, which is a crafted set from the High Isle chapter. It's very easy to craft this set. And the fact that it focuses on both critical chance and critical damage is going to pair really nicely with this particular setup on the Warden. You can see all of the critical chance bonuses we have here. And then the 5-piece increases your critical damage and critical healing by 8%. So I've done plenty of testing with this. It does really, really well in all types of content. Group content, solo, even solo arenas, and veteran dungeons. So I would recommend this. It's very flexible. If you don't have it already, definitely you should pick it up. Now, which pieces am I running here? Well, starting with the shoulders, I've got light shoulders, light waist, light hands, medium legs, and light feet. Of course, all those pieces should be divines, and then max Magicka as the enchant. If you're following along, we just have one more body piece. So that's going to be Slimecraw, 1-piece Slimecraw monster set. It's going to give us a critical chance 1-piece bonus here. I'm also running this as medium armor with the max Magicka enchant. So you can see we've got about 2 pieces of medium armor on the bigger pieces. Of course, our 1 piece of heavy armor on the chest. Everything else light. That's what I found to be the most optimal in terms of solo play. Remember that light armor pieces do give you passive offensive penetration and critical chance. That's the balance that I like, at least on this particular build, and I'll have all of this laid out in the written guide. Again, link will be down below if you want to see more details about how this works. Of course, that leaves us with just 1 piece left over. We got the Oaken Soul ring here, taking up the majority of our buffs and basically making this setup so easy. If you don't have this mythic yet and you're really interested in this 1-bar playstyle that you've seen, especially for heavy attack builds, I do recommend it. I'll have a link in the description for our Oaken Soul ring guide. It's pretty easy to pick up as long as you have access to mythics and, of course, the High Isle chapter. There haven't been any changes to this mythic yet, except for a change to a specific buff, and that's the Empower buff that I did want to talk about. That got reduced by 10%. It's really not a noticeable difference. You have to remember that we have tons of other bonuses built into heavy attacks, not just this one thing. Our Sergeant's Mail set, we have champion point bonuses. You'll have easy access to off balance on this build pretty much anytime you want. That's another huge bonus to heavy attack damage. So I know there's some concerns about the Empower buff getting nerfed. It's very minimal, you guys. Heavy attack builds are not bad at all. Moving into the Necrom chapter, they're still incredibly powerful. But that's the setup. Like I said, check out the written guide if you want to see more details. Let's jump into the skills. The incredibly simple setup on the 1-bar build, starting with our main offensive debuff. This is Deep Fissure from the Animal Companion skill line. This is the second skill that you get. And you want the Deep Fissure morph here for a very specific reason. You can see down here at the bottom, enemies' damage are afflicted with major and minor breach. That is a huge reduction in enemy armor. This means all of your abilities are going to hit for more damage, including your heavy attacks. So just make sure to use this skill consistently. It's about a 9-second skill overall when you look at both of the damage portions of this. It fires after 3 seconds and again after 6 seconds. So after about 9 or 10 seconds, you want to cast it again, primarily, as we said, to get that armor debuff on your enemies. Now, next up, we have Screaming Cliff Racer, and this is a really interesting way to run a heavy attack build. Like I said, with the Warden, if you play this correctly, you basically have off balance any time that you want. Now, this is different from a lot of heavy attack builds that have to rely on Wall of Elements. Setting enemies off balance with that skill can be a little bit random. Sometimes you'll get it. But no, with Screaming Cliff Racer, you can proc this at any time. The key is you have to be more than 7 meters away from the target. So in group content, this is no problem, right? You've got a tank holding the target. And in fact, you can play this build at pretty much any range that you want. For solo, obviously, that's a little bit more tricky. But I do find, sometimes the bear pet will end up tanking for you if you step back a little bit. You can also step back on certain boss phases where bosses are doing a specific mechanic where they're staying still. Just pop back for a second, hit your Cliff Racer, proc off balance, and it's really easy to do that as well. And then for solo arenas, this thing is amazing because you will be hitting enemies from a distance as they spawn in. For example, in Maelstrom Arena, or as you run up towards them in Vadashran, pop your Deep Fissure, that has a 3-second delay, then start hitting them with a Cliff Racer, that's going to send them off balance, go immediately into your heavy attack, which is going to be empowered. Huge damage bonus for hitting an off-balance target that's already debuffed with Deep Fissure. The other reason this is really good too, if you look at the tooltip here more closely, you get 100 weapon and spell damage for 10 seconds, which quadruples after damaging an off-balance enemy. So minimum, you'll have 100 extra weapon and spell damage, but every time you hit an off-balance enemy, that's going to go up to 400 weapon and spell damage. That's also buffed further by the Oaken Soul Ring and Major Sorcery, Major Brutality. So yeah, this is just a really strong option. Definitely play around with it. It's really good. Next up, we have our main damage over time. This is an AoE damage over time coming from Winter's Embrace. This is Winter's Revenge. This does very good AoE damage. It does snare enemies as well. Higher chance to apply the shield status effect. That means you get even more bonus critical damage. So yeah, this skill is really good. Make sure this is always up. Our next skill is another Winter's Embrace ability, Arctic Blast, the next one on our list here. Huge heal. Burst heal is great for emergencies, but it also does pretty much passive damage, AoE damage over time as well, and a stun. So the thing about Wardens is you have lots of great heals, right? You could use any heal from Green Balance until you get this, Fungal Growth. Living Trellis is also pretty effective. But nothing beats that burst heal, right? And with our critical chance and our critical healing, more than often, this is going to be, look, almost 20k, 19,000 heal, and every time this crits, and we have huge crit chance on this build. But not only that, the other reason this is good is it also does damage at the same time, right? You've got frost damage in an AoE that also has a high chance of proccing chilled. So I think all around, a bang for your buck skill, which is really important on a 1-bar build. By the way, it's important that your skills that you pick do multiple things if possible. So you get the heal, you get the damage, you get the stun, and the chilled status effect. This is really providing a lot for one skill. Now, our last normal ability, completely up to you. I've put a Alliance War skill on here, which you might think is kind of strange, but I'm actually using that only for the passive. So in support here, you don't even have to morph this skill. Revealing Flare gives you passive major protection, so that's an extra 10% damage reduction. We already get minor protection from the Oaken Soul Ring. If you want to use armor potions, you'll get tons of more armor from that. So this build feels very tanky along with our health recovery. This is a great option for playing solo. If you don't like that, you can put in another damage over time. Something like Fetcher Infection can be nice for group content even because this does minor vulnerability on the target. You can slot an extra heal for some group utility. You can slot a shield here, Crystallized Shield, if you're facing off a lot of ranged enemies. Archers and mages in some of the solo arenas like Maelstrom Arena, for example, can be extremely effective as well. So that one's really up to you. And then as far as the ultimate here, I do really like the Bear Ultimate, you guys. Wild Guardian is pretty nice because of the bleed damage here. This can also stun an enemy for 2 seconds. It does bonus execute damage on targets below 25%. It has a high chance of applying the hemorrhaging status effect. It's one of the highest damage status effects in the game, so this can be nice for increasing damage. But the cool thing about the Bear Pet in general is you don't even have to use it, meaning you don't have to cast it to get some extra damage out of it. It's going to do damage all the time with its basic attacks. If you use the ultimate skill itself, that's going to give you that bonus execute damage. But when I get to the champion points in a second, you'll see what the advantage is to not using this. Basically, it boosts your health recovery through the roof. You can see I have right now 3,000 health recovery. That has to do with one of the specific champion points that I get when I don't use my ultimate. Basically, when I store it up, the more ultimate I have stored, the more health recovery I have. So we'll look at that in just a minute. But let's look at the basic rotation just to show you how easy it is here on a dummy. So you're going to just start with Deep Fissure, like we said. Make sure you get that armor debuff. Follow up with Cliff Racer to get off balance. Put down your dot, and then heavy attack. That's the basic damage rotation. Remember, if the enemy is off balance, that's when you want to be heavy attacking the most, because you get bonus heavy attack damage on that. Other than that, really just recast those. Make sure to maintain those dots and buffs. Use your armor as well here. And then as soon as your off balance is ready to go, make sure you cast Screaming Cliff Racer again from about 7 meters away, and you'll maintain that off balance on the cooldown, which is really helpful. Okay, let's talk about those champion points very quickly here. As usual, I'll have this broken down by 300, 600, 900, and 1200 champion points in the written guide. So that should be helpful no matter what level you are. Make sure you check that out. Link is in the description. But as far as the slotted stars that I typically use in Green Tree, those don't really change. I'll usually start with Steed's Blessing for the movement speed, then pick up Treasure Hunter, Rationer, and Liquid Efficiency. For the blue tree, a couple of really important ones here. Probably the first I would recommend you get is actually in the Extended Might sub-constellation. It's down here at the bottom. It's called Weapons Expert. This gives you a total of 20% bonus damage done for your heavy attacks and your light attacks. So this is huge. Remember, I mentioned all of those different buffs we get to heavy attacks. This is why small changes to things like Empower really aren't a big deal. Because you have all of these other buffs working together. So I definitely recommend you get that one first. Next one I would get is actually Deadly Aim. Now this says it boosts your single target attacks, but this actually applies to Lightning Staff heavy attacks as well. Those begin as a single target attack that then gets spread or added to other targets through the Destruction Staff passive. So you will see a noticeable difference if you use Deadly Aim on a Lightning Staff heavy attack build specifically. And then I do recommend Fighting Finesse. Again, more critical damage is good. And then Wrathful Strikes, this is just like extra raw damage that gets applied to all of your damaging abilities, so this one's really good as well. And then Red Tree, this is where things get really interesting. You have lots of different possibilities here. Now, pretty standard setup would be like Rejuvenation, Fortified, and Boundless Vitality. That gives you just all good, survival stats. But if you really want to push, more difficult content, if you're starting to get into things like the solo arenas, then check out this one called Strategic Reserve. This is perfect for the Warden. I actually use this on my Bow Warden as well. This gives you 30 health recovery for every 10 ultimate you have unused, so stored in your ultimate bar. Like we were talking about earlier, the great thing about the Warden is your Bear Pet ultimate, it does damage no matter what. When you use your ultimate, that just gives you the bonus execute damage, which is nice. I mean, it will increase your DPS a good amount. But if your focus is survival, then just let your ultimate build up all the way to 500. That's going to give you 50 stacks of Strategic Reserve, so basically 1,500 raw health recovery. You can boost that by another 30% by just using a health potion or a tri-stat potion. Plus we have the Bewitched Sugar Skulls, the health recovery on Khajiit. So yeah, this is pretty much the ultimate survival champion point. If you want to, you can even pick this up first. If you don't have that much CP, try it out. Like I said, it's really, really powerful. Especially for surviving those solo arenas, and even if you want to solo dungeons, it's a really good option. Last but not least, if you are curious about the outfit style, this is something I believe is coming with the Necrom chapter. This is actually a costume called Sadrith Mora Formal Attire. All right, everybody, with that said, that's going to wrap up our updated heavy attack Magicka Warden 1-bar build. for the Elder Scrolls Online. If you guys liked the video or you found it helpful, do me a favor and crush that like button. It absolutely helps the channel. It helps YouTube know that this video is worth sharing. This video is just first of many updated builds for the Necrom chapter. So make sure to hit that subscribe button too if you'd like to see all of those as they come out here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget the written guide. The link will be down below in the pinned comment and description. If you have any questions at all about how the build works, everything is laid out there in detail, including all the skills, gear sets, alternate sets, all the important passives you need on the Magicka Warden, as well as the full champion point loadout from 300, 600, 900, and 1200 champion points. So if you're interested in building this for yourself, make sure to check that out. It is a great resource. If you have any questions about Oaken Soul builds or one bar builds, I'll have links for those in the description as well. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.